This, of course, is after the president's trip to Israel this week, coming with significant risks, not only to his physical safety, but his political life as well. But Daily Beast columnist David Rothkopf called the trip a success, saying, quote, this, the gamble had paid off in large part for all the reasons that successful gambles often do: preparation, experience, and being on the right side of the issues. And David Rothkopf is joining us now to talk more about this. David, thanks for joining us on this. Appreciate it. If you will, I want you first to expand on the president's trip to Israel, along with the address he made to the nation after he returned.
Well, I think the president has been trying to strike a balance. Clearly, he was outraged as anybody would be with the atrocities that were committed against the Israelis, and he wanted to show compassion for the Israelis and that we stood solidly with them in their ability to defend themselves and to seek justice. By the same token, as you just indicated in reading the statement, he wanted to send a message to the Israelis that they needed to work within the bounds of international law, that they needed to protect civilian lives, that humanitarian aid was extremely important and needed to continue to flow in. And those are messages that he delivered publicly and privately while he was in Israel. And then I thought very effectively in the statement that he made right after he got back. It is clear that he has a sense that Israeli lives are as important as Palestinian lives, and that the United States was going to stand for finding a solution, not just responding to the crisis of the moment, but looking towards a political solution. And I think it's important to note that the president also brought up the two-state solution, an idea that has been floundering in the past few years, just as the participants in the Cairo summit did.
I'm glad you brought some of that up because I want to read a part of your Daily Beast piece as well, talking about where the president and his administration has stood when it comes to this impending ground incursion, saying this. Biden and his administration, quote, saw no contradiction between standing foursquare behind Israel's right to self-defense while at the same time calling for respect for the rules of war and for the innocent lives on both sides who might be put at risk in the conflict. He even invoked at one point the mistakes that were made by the United States, David, here, obviously after 9/11, the obviously following the Iraq War and Afghanistan as well. And we know what happened there. So when you have that all in mind, and we talk about this impending ground incursion, right? 4,000 plus Palestinians have died in Gaza. Why would the president still be supporting then a ground incursion by the Israelis, considering the extensive loss of life, many of those Palestinian children?
Well, I think there are different kinds of ground incursions. I think the president of the United States is seeking, supporting, guiding the Israelis towards a limited, very focused kind of effort, targeting Hamas, targeting terrorists, and making great pains to avoid civilian casualties. That's a tough task. And I think the casualty totals you just mentioned reveal that we're already past any kind of balance in this thing. And I think the further we get into the war, and the Israelis have now said it is likely to be a long war, the more likely it is that the historical grievances between the Palestinians and the Israelis dominate this conversation, and the specific cause of the current crisis fades a little more into the background. And that's going to mean more people in the Arab streets, in streets around the world, calling for justice for the Palestinians and calling for an end to the civilian casualties that have already started to mount up.
Do you expect, and I think a lot of folks are thinking about this as they await to see what Israel does next, do you expect the president spoke to the Prime Minister Netanyahu about what would be the plans once they invade? And if so, would that even involve, obviously, Prime Minister Netanyahu staying on board in Israel can it involve Prime Minister Netanyahu surviving this? If his plan is to eradicate Hamas from Gaza, how, in fact, does he go on, considering it happened under his watch?
Well, my sense is, in talking to U.S. officials, that there was a concern that there actually was no Israeli plan, no long-term plan. The Israelis were responding to the crisis of the moment. I think the next phase of that, which is to say the incursion into Gaza and going after Hamas, needs a plan, needs a limit, needs metrics. And I think the United States was conveying that message. I think then beyond that, you have to say, well, if you're eliminating Hamas, what's the political entity in the Palestinian territories going to be? How are you going to work a deal with that political entity? As far as Netanyahu, it seems very unlikely that his administration is going to survive the end of this war. I think people think that the unity government they've got in place will stay until the conflict is over. But, 8 out of 10 Israelis believe that Netanyahu is responsible for creating the vulnerability that led to this crisis. And I don't think that's something that even he can recover from.
Do you think Netanyahu thinks he'll survive this?
I think he's constantly working to find a way to survive. I think one of the reasons that he may push for a long war, even as the U.S. and others push to limit the war, is because he'll be around as long as the war is around. And, maybe there's a possibility to turn things around. But my sense is that's not going to happen. He needs to understand that. And frankly, the sooner Bibi Netanyahu is gone, the better it will be for stability in the region, the better it will be for Israelis, the better it'll be for Palestinians.
David Rothkopf, thank you so much, sir. Appreciate it.